Good morning, everyone. I call to order this 13th meeting of the Public Utility Commission for calendar 2012. I ask that you all join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first matter on this morning's agenda is the approval of the minutes of the June 7th meeting, and editor of the minutes is Commissioner Cawley. I'd like to recognize Commissioner Cawley.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman. I reviewed the minutes of our June 7th public meeting, and I move that they be approved as submitted.
Second. Any discussion? Any objections? The minutes are approved as submitted. It's a pleasure to welcome to the podium this morning to begin public meeting Ms. Cheryl Walker Davis. Good morning, Cheryl.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Good morning.
May it please this Honorable Commission, on behalf of your various offices and bureaus, we present for your consideration and disposition the following agenda items, commencing this morning with matters on behalf of the Bureau of Technical Utility Services. It is recommended in omnibus fashion that the Commission adopt all items appearing on pages 1 and 2 through and including the application of Steelton and High Spire Railroad Company.
So moved. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
On page 3, on behalf of the Bureau of Audits, it is recommended that the Commission adopt the recommendation with regard to People Energy Company's generation supply adjustment.
So moved. Second. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
On page 4, with regard to matters presented on behalf of the Office of Special Assistance, we recommend the adoption of the first item pertaining to the Consolidated Rail Corporation's application.
So moved. Second. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
With regard to the petitions for reconsideration filed in the proceeding involving the investigation of interstate access charges and intra-Atlantic toll rates of rural carriers, as well as the Pennsylvania Universal Service Fund, there is the joint motion of Chairman Powelson and Commissioner Whitmer, and the statements of Vice Chairman Coleman and Commissioners Gardner, Hawley, and Whitmer.
Let's start with entering into the record the joint motion, myself and Commissioner Whitmer, and I'd like to recognize Commissioner Whitmer for purposes. Commissioner Gardner reminded me we need a second, so we'll start there and then procedurally move over to Commissioner. Got it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our colleague may have been a little confused on the procedure. I'd like our joint statement, our joint motion rather, to be entered into the record as if we read it in its entirety. Before the Commission today for disposition are the joint petitions for reconsideration and stay filed on April 9, 2012 by the Pennsylvania Telephone Association and CenturyLink, a verified joint statement filed on April 9, 2011 by PTA, CTL, and the updated petition for reconsideration and comments of AT&T, also filed on April 9, 2012. Several parties to the proceeding timely filed answers to the petitions. In its March 20th, 2012 order, the Commission requested the parties address several key questions, including the following. How will the Pennsylvania ILACs that have alternative regulation and network modernization plans in place under Chapter 30 of the Public Utility Code be affected by the implementation of the Federal Communications Inter-Carrier Compensation Reforms? Will they be able to seek intrastate rate relief of any type beyond the levels provided under the FCC's eligible recovery mechanism and associated federal CA Act support? At the heart of these questions is whether the Pennsylvania rural local exchange carriers will be able to claim exogenous event treatment under the relevant provisions of their Chapter 30 plans in order to make up for any revenue not recovered through the FCC's allowed revenue recovery mechanisms. While there are various differences among the Chapter 30 plans filed by the RLECs, parties state that this event, the Connect America Fund order, triggers the opportunity for Pennsylvania's RLECs operating under Chapter 30 plans to seek alternative recovery mechanisms for the eligible recovery revenue which is lost each year. We believe that the FCC's November 18, 2011 order comprehensively changing the intercarrier compensation structure for the nation's telecommunications carriers is clearly a federal regulatory change which affects revenues as contemplated by the RLEC's Chapter 30 plans. In accordance with the provisions of Chapter 30, the terms of an RLEC's NMP govern the regulation of the RLEC. We believe that the RLEC's Chapter 30 plans speak for themselves and provide an opportunity for the carriers or other parties to seek this type of treatment. We do not, however, believe the carriers should be directed to file for this type of treatment for any future revenue losses, as argued by some. Also, based upon the verified joint statement, the opportunity to file for any exogenous event treatment remains in the future because the effects of the federal changes have not been calculated to date. We wish to be clear that our action today recognizes the provisions of Chapter 30 as amended by our General Assembly in 2004 and the current provisions of the RLEC's Chapter 30 plans. In addition, we reiterate that it is within the RLEC's or other parties' control as to whether the provisions of a particular Chapter 30 plan are used to file an exogenous event petition. We note that because rate change filings made pursuant to Chapter 30 plans must result in rates that are just and reasonable pursuant to Sections 1301 and 3019H of the Public Utility Code, it is premature to make a blanket ruling that all rate change filings invoking exogenous event treatment will be approved and permitted to automatically go into effect. Therefore, we move that this order regarding joint petition for reconsideration and stay filed on April 9, 2012 by the Pennsylvania Telephone Association and the United Telephone Company of Pennsylvania, CenturyLink. A verified joint statement filed on April 9, 2012 by PTA, CTL, and the updated petition for reconsideration and comments of AT&T filed on April 9, 2012 at the above-mentioned docket be modified as consistent with this motion.
Second. Any discussion? Oh, excuse me, we're jumping ahead of ourselves. We have statements that we need to enter into the record, and let me start with the Vice Chairman. Vice Chairman Coleman, I'd like to recognize you for purposes of your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a conflict statement, and I would simply ask that be entered into the record as though I read it in its entirety.
So noted. Len, I would like to recognize Commissioner Gardner for purposes of your statement. Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to be recorded as voting no on the motion, but yes on the staff recommendation. I would like my statement to be included in the record as if I read it in its entirety. Our jurisdictional local exchange companies anticipate substantial revenue losses due to the regulatory policies of the FCC's Connect America Fund order, or CAF. I do not define the CAF order and revenue consequences flowing therefrom as an exogenous event under the approved Chapter 30 plans of our rural local exchange companies. The majority position here today accepts as a plausible argument that the revenue losses qualify for exogenous event treatment under the jurisdictional shift in cost category of each rural local exchange company Chapter 30 plan. By allowing such exogenous event treatment of the CAF order, carriers will argue that their anticipated losses in access revenues should be considered as revenues which are not captured by the price stability mechanism in their respective Chapter 30 plans. My view is that access charge revenues have always been viewed as a transitional regulatory mechanism to move from a prior monopoly environment to one of competition. So it is not prudent or honest for any entity to argue that revenue streams represented by access charge revenues at both the state and revenue levels were to be continued indefinitely. While the CAF order provides carriers with the opportunity to seek partial recovery from a carrier's end users' customers, this amount is also subject to offset by bank revenues under their Chapter 30 plans. Clearly, carriers can simply implement their bank revenues in an attempt to recover any excess charge reductions, thus mitigating the need for exogenous treatments of the CAF order. Furthermore, some of the revenue losses caused by the CAF order are interstate. As noted in the analysis of Commissioner Colley, FCC jurisdictional separation rules may not be able to properly account for what federal eligible recovery support amounts are properly attributable to the intrastate jurisdiction. Lastly, this commission has historically attempted to account for the joint and common costs incurred by a terminating carrier who is responsible for maintaining the loop that is the last mile into an end user's home. The CAF order essentially values this obligation at zero under a uniform national bill and keep regulatory regime, which requires the terminating carrier to fund the joint and common costs of the loop primarily from its end user subscribers. Pennsylvania wildland consumers should not be required to pick up the tab for a federal policy with which the Commission disagrees. For this reason, for the reasons I have just outlined, I must respectfully dissent on the motion.
Thank you. Now I'd like to recognize Commissioner Colley for purposes of his statement. Commissioner Colley.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a lengthy concurring in part and dissenting in part statement which I asked to be placed on the record as if I had read it in its entirety. Let me summarize the salient points. First, I concur in the recommended disposition of most issues arising from reconsideration petitions and updated reconsideration petitions in this proceeding. However, I strongly disagree with my esteemed colleague's motion that opens the door for recognizing the effects of the November 18, 2011 Federal Communications Commission order as an exogenous events in the price cap mechanisms of Pennsylvania's rural incumbent local telephone companies, that operate under Chapter 30 Alternative Regulation and Network Modernization Plans. The recognition and rate-making treatment of exogenous events and price cap mechanisms is reserved for unique events and not for circumstances that affect whole segments of the regulated telecommunications industry, as is the case with the FCC order. Even if arguably the FCC order effects can be classified as recognizable exogenous events for the Chapter 30 rural local exchange carriers, and potentially for other and bigger non-rural Chapter 30 incumbent local telephone companies, the rate-making recognition of such exogenous events will be extremely complex and will not result in the establishment of just and reasonable rates for end-user consumers of retail telecommunications services. This will happen because of the FCC's misplaced theory about intercarrier compensation and the adoption of the unfounded bill and keep regime, which provides for zero compensation to local carriers for the termination of calls on their systems. This method deviates from the sound principle that this Commission has followed and principle that has been affirmed by Pennsylvania's appellate courts, namely that all retail and wholesale users of landline switch access networks share and contribute towards the joint and common costs of such networks, where such costs include those for wire and cable facilities. Instead, the FCC's bill and keep regime will load all these costs on the backs of retail end-user consumers alone. Thus, the recognition of the FCC order effects as these exogenous events will violate this long-standing Commission principle that has been affirmed by our courts, and it will result in unjust and unreasonable rates that will have to be exclusively shouldered by end-user customers. I'm afraid that by extending the exogenous event recognition to the FCC order effects, we will be implicitly acknowledging that the FCC can preempt our authority and can exercise jurisdiction over intrastate retail rates for telecommunications services. We do not need to go there and accrue related regulatory policy risks. From a practical perspective, both the Commission and its staff will be hard-pressed to evaluate requests for the rate-making treatment of exogenous events arising from the FCC order. We may have as little as 45 days at our disposal while we struggle to determine whether the carrier in question first obtained the appropriate monetary amounts of relief from federal recovery and other support mechanisms before making an exogenous event claim to this Commission. The absence of relevant filing guidelines and the less than perfect jurisdictional separations rules on the FCC level will not help. This is a recipe for needless litigation. Finally, I am opposed also to any acknowledgement that changes in the FCC determined rate of return that applies to rural local exchange carriers classified as rate of return companies in the federal jurisdiction should become an exogenous event that can receive rate-making recognition in Pennsylvania. For these reasons, I vote no to the motion, but I do concur in the recommended disposition of the other issues in the proceeding.
Thank you, Commissioner Cawley. And finally, I'd like to recognize Commissioner Whitmer for purposes of her statement. Commissioner Whitmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a conflict statement for one of my team members. I'd like it to be entered into the record as if I read it in its entirety.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes 3-2, noting the dissent of Commissioners Cawley and Gardner. And please note that they are concurrent in the staff recommendation. So again, the motion passes 3-2.
Continuing with the presentation of agenda items, Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the Office of Special Assistance, it is recommended in omnibus fashion that the Commission adopt the 2 items appearing on page 5, as well as the 2 items appearing on page 6, and the first item at the top of page 7 pertaining to Alfred Stempel versus Metropolitan Edison Company.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
With regard to the formal complaint of Connie Connor versus Pico Energy Company, there is a motion of Vice Chairman Coleman.
I'd like to recognize Vice Chairman Coleman for purposes of this motion. Vice Chairman Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd ask that my motion be entered into the record as though I read it in its entirety. For the Commission are exceptions from complaint Connie Connor, the initial decision dismissing her formal complaint against Pico Energy Company. In her complaint, Ms. Connor alleges as a result of identity theft that she was improperly charged for service at a Pottstown, PA service location from October 2008 through March 2009 because she never resided there and never benefited from the utility service provided. Pico responds that she received a telephone application for utility service from Mrs. Connor requesting the service be provided in her name to the Pottstown address. Excuse me. I agree with the initial decision dismissing the complaint and do not believe that a remand is necessary or appropriate. In addition, the dismissal is consistent with the Commission's precedent as discussed in my written motion. Nevertheless, I am sympathetic to the complainant's circumstances in this proceeding and the fact that she may have been a victim of identity theft. Therefore, I recommend that the parties attempt to amicably resolve this matter post-decision. The details concerning how the parties may attempt to resolve this matter are contained in my written motion. Therefore, I move that the initial decision be adopted consistent with this motion and the Commission's Office of Special Assistance draft an appropriate order consistent with this motion.
Second.
You're with us, right? Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
In omnibus fashion, it is recommended that the Commission adopt all items appearing on pages 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, through and including the joint petition of Armstrong Telecom and Frontier with regard to their interconnection agreement.
So moved. Second. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
On behalf of the Bureau of Technical Utility Services, again in omnibus fashion, we recommend the adoption of all items appearing on pages 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, through and including Bureau of Technical Utility Services quarterly earnings report.
So moved. Second. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
On behalf of the Law Bureau, it is recommended that the Commission adopt the first item pertaining to the petition for reconsideration filed by T-Mobile.
So moved. Second. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
It is recommended that the Commission adopt the staff recommendation with regard to the petitions for reconsideration filed in the proceeding involving the implementation of the unconventional gas well fee, Act 13, noting the statement of Commissioner Gardner.
So moved. Second. I'd like to recognize Commissioner Gardner for purposes of, I believe, a verbal statement.
I would like my statement to be entered into, the dissenting statement to be entered into the record if I've read it in this entirety. Thank you.
So noted. Let me also thank the team members in our Law Bureau for their excellent work around this issue. And I will now, if there are any objections, hearing none, the motion passes unanimously, noting the dissenting statement of Commissioner Gardner.
It is recommended that the Commission adopt the remaining two items on page 21 as well. As the first item at the top of page 22 pertaining to the petition for reconsideration of T-Mobile Northeast.
So moved. Second. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
It should be noted that the next item pertaining to PPL has been postponed until public meeting of August 2nd. And the last item, we recommend the adoption of the staff recommendation with regard to the petition seeking approval of a revised solar photovoltaic alternative energy credit. That's Metropolitan Edison Company's petition.
So moved. Second. Any discussion? Any objection?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be recorded in the record.
So noted. Hearing none, hearing none, the motion passes 4-1, noting the dissent of Commissioner Whitman.
Turning now to matters on behalf of the Office of Administrative Law Judge with regard to the first item at the top of page 23 pertaining to the Bureau of Transportation and Safety versus William Diaz, TA Ashley Stretch Limo. There was the joint motion of Commissioner Gardner and Commissioner Whitman.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Gardner for purposes of this joint motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of Commissioner Whitmer, we would like our motion to be entered into the record as if read in its entirety. In this proceeding, the ALJ recommends approving a settlement whereby Mr. Diaz agrees to pay a penalty of $250 and agrees to cease and desist from further violations. We disagree. We cannot support settling a proceeding where a complainant has blatantly and repeatedly ignored the Commission's directives. Mr. Diaz did not answer any of the complaints filed against him, and he did not timely pay any of the penalties imposed upon him. Additionally, Mr. Diaz agreed to and was ordered to file an application for group and party authority, which he never did file. For the reasons outlined in the full motion, we disagree with the ALJ's analysis that the $250 penalty proposed in the settlement would ensure further compliance, future compliance. While the $250 penalty as part of the settlement was promptly paid, we believe the full outstanding penalty of $500 from the first complaint should be imposed, of which $250 remains unpaid. Therefore, we move that the initial decision be reversed, that the settlement agreement be rejected, and Mr. Diaz be directed to pay the remaining $250 of the imposed penalties within 30 days of the entry of the opinion and order, and if Mr. Diaz does not comply with this opinion and order, his certificate shall be revoked. Finally, that the Office of Special Assistance prepare an opinion and order consistent with this motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
With regard to the formal complaint of Gila Williams versus Philadelphia Gas Works, there is the motion of Commissioner Gardner.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Gardner for purposes of his motion. Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'd like my motion entered into the record as if I read it in its entirety. Ms. Williams filed a formal complaint alleging that PGW's Philadelphia Gas Works service line running under her house and into her basement was allowing water to leak into her basement. PGW acknowledges that it owns the service lines but denies responsibility for the costly repair that will be involved to gain access to the line. Because it is unknown when the service line was installed and under what conditions, this case is to be remanded for further fact-finding regarding the circumstances under which conduit pipe and service lines were installed. Upon the remand, the parties are to answer the following questions. When was the service line installed? When was the house built? Was an addition added upon over the service line after it was installed? When did PGW first become aware of the repair logistics of the service line? How does PGW typically handle similarly situated service lines and conduit repairs, and who typically pays for such repairs? And how was PGW been conducting its leak surveys at this residence? Further, I recommend that this matter be referred to the Commission's Gas Safety Division to investigate whether there is a safety issue with the complaint to the service line and to take whatever further action it deems necessary. Therefore, I move that this matter be remanded for further action consistent with this motion, and that the Office of Special Assistance prepare an opinion and order consistent with the motion.
Second. Any discussion? Any objections?
Mr. Chairman, I wish to be recorded as a no vote on the motion. I don't support the remand in this case, although I agree with the referral of any potential safety issues to our Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement. I support the adoption of the initial decision dismissing the complaint.
Any further objections?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I also would like to be recorded as dissenting on the motion.
So noted. Hearing none, the motion passes 3-2, noting the dissent of Vice Chairman Coleman and Commissioner Whipper.
With regard to the complaint of A. Edward Schwartz versus Delaware and Hudson Railway Company, DBA Canadian Pacific, there is the motion of Commissioner Gardner.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Gardner for purposes of his motion. Commissioner Gardner.
I think this is my last one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like my motion to be entered into the record as if I read it in its entirety. Before us today for consideration is the recommended decision approving the plan submitted by PennDOT to reopen the bridge where State Route 4009 crosses above grade the tracks of Canadian Pacific Railroad at Lacombe Township, Lackawanna County. I agree with the administrative law judge's recommendation that PennDOT be permitted to complete the proposed work. However, I'm concerned that this temporary fix will allow permanent repairs to languish. And I'll be honest, I'm a bit concerned with the current condition of this crossing. This commission has been charged with the responsibility for ensuring public traffic safety. That being said, it is imperative that we expeditiously commence proceeding to determine the final disposition of the crossing, especially future maintenance responsibilities. Therefore, I move that the recommended decision be adopted, that the matter be assigned to the Office of Administrative Law Judge to expeditiously commence proceeding to determine the future disposition of the crossing, and that the Office of Special Assistance prepare an opinion in order consistent with this motion.
Second. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
On page 24, it is recommended that the Commission adopt the recommendation with regard to the People's Purchase Gas Cost proceeding, noting the joint statement of Commissioner Hawley and Commissioner Whitman.
So moved.
Second.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Hawley for purposes of reading the joint statement
Thank you, Chairman. On behalf of Commissioner Whitmer and myself, I make this statement. Before us is the People's TWP LLC tariff supplement proposing changes in rates for recovery of purchase gas costs effective August 1st, 2012. It was filed on January 13th of this year and modified by a February 1st, 2012 filing, and the joint petition for settlement filed on April 23rd, 2012. On a positive note, companies should be commended for the reductions in reported lost unaccounted for gas. The company submitted documentation in this proceeding that its lost and unaccounted for gas has declined from 4.54% in 2009 to 3.56% in 2010 to 3.17% in 2011. It's encouraging to see declines in these figures, and the company is urged to continue its efforts in this regard. Despite these declines in lost and unaccounted for, the company unfortunately has not proposed to reduce the fuel retention volumes it charges its transportation customers. According to the recommended decision, the company's 3-year average lost and unaccounted for gas and company used gas has declined to 3.84%. However, the proposed retention rates remain at 6.3% for small volume customers and 4% for large volume customers. Even the company's testimony estimated these losses at 4.7% to 6.4% for small volume customers and 2.3% to 3.5% for large volume customers. Although the company did attempt to rationalize that the discounts offered to certain competitive accounts will reduce the average system retention volumes to a lower level, the company provided no quantitative analysis to justify retaining the existing retention levels. In the future, natural gas distribution companies should demonstrate with quantifiable evidence that the retention rates are just and reasonable. For example, in this proceeding, the company should have provided information on the total volumes and weighted average discount retention rate relative to the volumes and retention rates of undiscounted customers. Further, if natural gas distribution companies contend that both full rate purchase gas cost and full rate transportation customers benefit from the revenue contributions provided by discounted rate customers, then natural gas distribution companies should provide evidence as to the appropriate sharing of these fuel retention discounts to both PGC, purchase gas costs, and transportation customers.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
It is recommended that the Commission adopt ALJ Coyer's recommended decision with regard to the National Fuel Distribution Company's 1307F proceeding.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
And it is recommended that the Commission adopt ALJ Salapa's recommended decision with regard to the UTI Utilities Electric Division 1307E proceeding.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, that concludes the presentation of regular agenda items. Turning now to the carrying agenda. There is a motion of Commissioner Cawley with regard to default service reconciliation interim guidelines.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Cawley for purposes of this motion. Commissioner Cawley.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I ask that my lengthy motion be placed on the record as if I had read it in its entirety. As of January 1st, 2011, all electric distribution companies in Pennsylvania have moved beyond the rate cap period to a market-based default service plan. In order to fully recover the cost of providing default service, all electric distribution companies have implemented reconciliation riders to recover the cost of generation, transmission, and other related default supply services. Ideally, these EDCs would have reasonably forecasted and matched these costs to revenues. resulting in only minor cash imbalances. Unfortunately, however, traditional methods of reconciliation accounting and of allocating costs to rate classes, as well as significant customer participation in the retail market, have caused a great deal of volatility in default service pricing associated with the recovery of revenue and cost imbalances. In some instances, these imbalances have resulted in significant rate adjustments referred to as E factors, and they have produced rate volatility and inaccurate price signals, and therefore have complicated shopping decisions for consumers. The price that is offered to consumers reflects all of these reconciliations, these E factors, and not actual market prices. These challenges have been well documented in recent proceedings pending before the Commission. In these proceedings, issues have arisen that are likely to have industry-wide implications. The Commission's goals are to ensure that the current prices reflect current costs as accurately as is feasible, that the electric distribution companies are able to fully recover their just and reasonable default service costs, and the default service customers pay the full cost of default service. To further these goals, the Commission seeks feedback from market participants on changes that we should make to reconciliation riders in order to better ensure that costs and associated revenues are first appropriately matched, secondly assigned to the appropriate rate class, and third, recovered expeditiously and accurately as required by Act 129. This will also help ensure that interest charges and credits are minimized. Accordingly, the Commission shall seek comments on a number of questions which are contained in my motion. And these comments and reply comments are sought as well as any additional issues that market participants feel the Commission needs to address regarding default service reconciliation rights. After receiving these comments, we intend to establish interim guidelines and make modifications to the existing default service policy statement and regulations if necessary. We also take note of an ongoing parallel proceeding regarding transmission cost reconciliation. We anticipate taking action in that parallel proceeding at an upcoming public meeting. Where appropriate, we will also incorporate the relevant findings and recommendations from that proceeding for the purposes of establishing guidelines to improve our default service reconciliation process for both transmission and generation-related costs. Therefore, I move that the Law Bureau draft an order consistent with this motion, that comments be filed within 30 days of entry of the order that the Law Bureau will prepare, and that reply comments be filed 45 days from the entry date of that same order.
Second. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
That concludes the presentation of public meeting agenda items, and I believe there's another matter that you have, Mr. Sherman, of retirement.
There is a big announcement here this morning. You know, it's hard to believe you walk down the hall, you prepare to come down the stairs in a public meeting, and you see, go by Law Bureau and pay homage. And, you know, it hit me today. There was a light out. His name tag was still there, but the light was out, and we recognized that after 35 years of unbelievable service to this commission, we lose John Levin. And I know some people at PJM might be cracking champagne bottles when they hear that, but we certainly don't. And I think a lot of us know who John is and what he stands for. And he graduated of NYU and went to law school at the University of New Hampshire. But he started his career back in 1977 here at the Commission. I'm reminded by my little cliff notes here that Lou Carter was chairman, that Buzz Satinsky was the chief counsel, and then I get all this little history that President Carter made some statements about oil and our dependency on foreign oil. Not much has changed since that 1977. I do believe that Billy Martin was the general manager of the New York Yankees at that time. Come on, Commissioner Barner, roll it. So, for those of you that have followed John's career, in the 70s he began in the rates division of the Law Bureau. He handled mainly at the time telephone and has made this incredible transformation into handling very complex FERC-related matters. As I consider him, he is the true consumer advocate when it comes to PJM-related issues for this commission, and we have been well served by his efforts. I think it's important to note that you know, that you often hear when someone retires, there are big shoes to be filled. And that certainly has not gone unnoticed amongst the five of us. The loss of John Levin, with 35 plus years of experience, is a huge loss to this commission. Now, I know Buck Pankey, in his infinite wisdom, has provided us a nice transition period in which we can get two young bucks up and running to handle the workload that John has left us. We hope, right, Buck? And I also should note, this is amazing to me, but John, I can get this quote in front of me, he's a true Renaissance man, and we're going to hear from him shortly. His range of interests are wide-reaching. The history of railroads, which is interesting. Sailing, telling bad jokes, I'm told. Bashing Microsoft. And believe it or not, he's a proud owner of I hope it's a York County produced Harley-Davidson motorcycle. That I hope in his retirement that he gets to cover a lot of roadways and byways here, not only in the Commonwealth, but across the United States. So obviously with retirement comes more free time, and John can hopefully indulge in some of his hobbies. But again, I'm sincere in stating here this morning, it's a huge loss to this commission that we lose someone with 35 plus years of great service, great institutional knowledge. And John, my colleagues and I, and everybody who worked with you, everybody who's known you over a 35-year track record here at the Commission, we want to wish you all the best, but more importantly, we want to thank you for a job well done. So thank you very much. John, you're, in keeping with the tradition of having a retiree come forward and roast the commission, we'd like it to be very similar to our good friend, our former secretary, Mr. McNulty, if you can keep this, if you can keep it at that level. And I know some of my colleagues will have some comments, but please, feel free. We'd like to provide you an opportunity to chat with us.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to make a correction to your statement. All of my jokes are authentic, time-tested American jokes. and we don't have any offshore jokes. But I would like to say that it's been a pleasure and a great honor to represent the Commission and the public interest. The Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission has a national reputation as being a leader and a mover in all of the issues affecting its jurisdiction. This is something rare and has benefited the citizens of Pennsylvania greatly. I know that no one is indispensable, and I know the Commission will carry on this tradition. In my area, it was the area that I've worked in for the last decade and a half, wholesale and retail competition. There's a lot of work to be done, and achieving the nirvana of the near perfect competition is not going to be easy. Not going to be an easy job. But Pennsylvania's opinions and its interaction with legislation, and I believe the federal regulators as well. So thank you for those kind words. I appreciate it. I do have a trace of sorrow at moving on to the next adventure, but I know that you'll work for the public interest and citizens of Pennsylvania as you always have. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe it's time to recognize Commissioner Cawley, the great historian of this organization, and I believe he has some remarks. Commissioner Cawley.
Well, I mean, what do you say to someone who has served the commission for 35 years? It's really hard to find adequate words to thank you, John, and to praise you enough for the thousands of cases that you have worked on, always keeping in mind the public interest. You are noted for that. And I know that as your career developed at the commission, you took on the often thankless task of advocating before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, where as a commission we are placed in an advocacy role. We don't get to make the decisions. We have to try to persuade other regulators that our positions are wise and good and in the public interest. And John, you took on that role. And I know that it meant a lot of lonely evenings on the road in Washington. And I know that it took a lot out of you because you believe so fervently that what the public interest requires. And many, many times the federal regulators didn't see it your way or our way. Very frustrating to carry on when you suspect that less than noble interests have prevailed for reasons that really didn't suit Pennsylvania, didn't suit our consumers. So I know that frustrated you over the years. I know that you worked tirelessly for the people of Pennsylvania. So I just want to tell you that on behalf of myself and my colleagues, we respect you enormously for the good work you've done for us and for the people of Pennsylvania. Now, I have just a token gift that I'd like to give you before you get the real gift. So I'm going to give this to you. You've never lost your way from public interest, but you might lose your way on the Appalachian Trail. He tells me he's walked much of the trail, but not all of it, so he doesn't get lost. And Godspeed for a wonderful retirement. Thank you so much.
Well, we are adjourned again, John. We want to express to you our deepest thanks for just a stellar career, and we expect you to show your face around here. You know, we need your wisdom at times, and I know you'll commit to that. Not now. You need to decompress a little bit, take a little ride maybe down the turnpike, and then get off in an exit or two. But again, thank you for all that you've meant to this commission, and we will miss you. But we know you'll be here providing good mentoring to the next generation, so thank you very much. On that note, we're adjourned with John. We're going to borrow you and Buck for a nice presentation of the clock, and we are adjourned.